The smell of stale Camel lights and fresh Lysol always meant one of two things when it came to Arthur Vance. He was either trying to hide a week-long bender, or he had just done something monumentally stupid with money he didn't own. Today it was both. Leo stood on the porch of the craftsman-style home on Elm Street, his fingers wrapped tightly around the brass key his grandmother, Evelyn, had given him 3 weeks before her heart finally gave out. The house was supposed to be empty. It was supposed to be a quiet vault of dust motes, faded floral wallpaper, and the lingering scent of peppermint tea. Instead, the front door was propped open by a cheap plastic wedge, and the heavy oak dining table, the one Leo had helped his grandfather sand down 20 years ago, was being aggressively maneuvered through the threshold by 2 guys in grease-stained jumpsuits. Leo blocked the doorway, his boots planted firm on the welcome mat. He asked them what they thought they were doing. The larger of the 2 movers wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty forearm, grunting as he lowered his end of the table. He told Leo they were just doing their job, clearing the place out for the closing walkthrough, and muttered something about the new owner wanting it totally vacant by 5 o'clock. The word closing hit Leo like a physical blow, knocking the air straight out of his lungs. He felt a sudden, sharp drop in his stomach. He demanded to know who told them the house was sold. Before the mover could answer, a voice boomed from the hallway inside, dripping with a forced, salesman-like bravado that Leo recognized instantly. It was Arthur. He walked out holding a half-empty box of Evelyn's vintage crystal, wearing a suit that cost more than his monthly child support payments used to be, flashing a grin that was entirely teeth and no eyes. He clapped a hand on Leo's shoulder, turning to the movers to tell them to take a 5-minute smoke break. When the men trudged down the steps, Arthur's smile evaporated, replaced by the familiar, twitchy defensiveness of a man who spent his entire life running from his own debts. He told Leo he wasn't supposed to be here today, claiming he was going to call him tonight to explain everything once the paperwork was finalized and the wire transfer cleared. Leo shoved his father's hand off his shoulder, his voice dangerously low. He asked Arthur if he actually sold the house. Arthur scoffed, waving a hand dismissively as if he had just traded a used lawnmower instead of his own mother's lifelong sanctuary. He told Leo to grow up, arguing that the market was peaking, the house was a money pit, and as Evelyn's only living son and the sole executor named in her basic will, it was his responsibility to liquidate the estate. He promised Leo he would get a cut, a few grand to help with his student loans, but insisted the deal was done. The papers were signed, and a developer named Vanguard Holdings bought it cash out, no contingencies. Leo looked past his father into the hollowed-out living room. The square patches on the walls where Evelyn's oil paintings used to hang looked like open wounds. Arthur had stripped the place bare in less than 72 hours, treating his mother's legacy like a fire sale to fund whatever latest scheme or gambling debt was breathing down his neck. Leo asked Arthur if he even cared that this was the only place they had left of her. Arthur's face darkened, the fake warmth vanishing entirely. He stepped closer, his breath smelling of mints and cheap whiskey, telling Leo that sentimentality didn't pay the bills. He said he was the executor, the legal owner of the property the moment her pulse stopped, and he had every right to sell it. He warned Leo not to make a scene and told him to go home. Leo didn't yell. He didn't swing. Instead, a strange, ice-cold calm washed over him. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, sliding out a folded, notarized document printed on heavy legal bond paper. The document his grandmother had signed in the presence of her estate attorney just days before she went into the hospital, back when Arthur was too busy tracking the horses to bother visiting her. Leo opened the paper, held it up right in front of Arthur's twitching eyes, and told his father to look at the bottom line. Arthur squinted, his brow furrowing as he tried to read the dense legalese. He muttered, asking what this garbage was. Leo explained it clearly. He told Arthur that while he might be the executor of the emotional shell of the estate, Grandma Evelyn wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what Arthur would do the second she was gone. So 3 years ago, when Arthur begged her for a $70,000 loan to start a logistics business and never paid back a dime, Evelyn had her attorney quietly title a primary, non-negotiable lien against the property in Leo's name, secured by the exact value of the house's remaining equity plus interest. Arthur's face went pale. The twitch in his left eyelid started up again. He snatched the paper from Leo's hand, his eyes darting across the lines, catching the words primary secured creditor asterisk, absolute right of first refusal asterisk, and Leo Vance asterisk. He shook his head, his voice cracking as he claimed this wasn't legal, that she didn't have the mental capacity to sign this, and that he was the executor. Leo took the paper back, folding it neatly and sliding it back into his pocket. He told Arthur that the attorney who drafted it was the former county surrogate judge, so the legality was airtight. He explained to his father that as the primary lien holder, the house couldn't legally be transferred, sold, or closed without his explicit signature releasing the debt. He pointed out that Arthur had just signed a contract to sell a property. He didn't legally have the clear title to clear, which meant he had just committed major real estate fraud against a corporate developer. Arthur stumbled back a step, hitting the doorframe. The reality of the situation was starting to pierce through his arrogance. If Vanguard Holdings found out the title wasn't clean, the deal would collapse, the earnest money would be forfeited, and they could sue Arthur into oblivion, or worse, hand the file over to the district attorney. Arthur changed his tune instantly, his voice dropping into a desperate, groveling whine. He grabbed Leo's arm, begging him to think about the family, claiming he owed people money who didn't take no for an answer, and promised to split the profits 50-50 if Leo just signed the release right now. Leo looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw nothing but an empty suit fueled by desperation. He stepped past him into the house, pulled the plastic wedge out from under the front door, and let the heavy oak barrier slam shut right in Arthur's face, locking it from the inside. Sitting down on the bottom step of the grand staircase, Leo pulled out his phone. He didn't call a lawyer, and he didn't call the police. He dialed the number listed on the brightly colored Vanguard Holdings flyer Arthur had left on the kitchen counter. When a sharp, professional voice answered on the third ring, identifying herself as the lead acquisition agent for the region, Leo took a deep breath. He told her his name was Leo Vance, the sole primary lien holder of the Elm Street property. He informed her that the man they were currently under contract with did not hold a clean title, had no authority to satisfy the underlying debts, and that he was officially calling to halt the sale. The line went dead silent on the other end for 3 long seconds. When the agent spoke again, the professional warmth was completely gone, replaced by the cold, calculated tone of a corporate machine, realizing it had just been walked into a legal minefield. She asked how quickly Leo could get to their downtown office with the original paperwork. Leo looked around the empty hallway, feeling his grandmother's presence in the quiet warmth of the wood. He told the agent he'd be there in 20 minutes. Downstairs on the porch, Arthur was frantically pounding on the heavy wood door, his muffled screams demanding to be let in, his fists thudding uselessly against the reinforced oak. Leo didn't even flinch. He walked out the back door, got into his truck and backed out of the driveway, leaving his father sweating through his expensive suit on the front porch, watching his entire universe begin to unravel. The glass tower housing Vanguard Holdings downtown felt less like an office building and more like a vertical fortress of brushed steel and tinted windows. Leo walked through the glass doors, his scuffed work boots clicking loudly against the immaculate white marble floor. He felt out of place, but he didn't feel weak. The folded document in his breast pocket felt heavier, more solid than the entire skyscraper. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was completely silent. When the doors slid open, He was met by a receptionist who looked like she had been genetically engineered for corporate compliance. She didn't ask his name. She just looked at his clothes, gave a tight, practiced smile, and pointed him toward a conference room at the end of the hall. Inside, the room was dominated by a massive mahogany table that mirrored the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Sitting at the center was a woman in her late 30s with sharp, angular features and dark hair pulled back into a flawless bun. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, and her laptop was already open, illuminating the cold expression on her face. A corporate attorney sat next to her, surrounded by thick folders of title reports and contracts. The woman stood up, extending a hand without a hint of warmth. She introduced herself as Victoria Cross, the regional director of acquisitions for Vanguard. She didn't offer him coffee or ask how his day was. She simply gestured to the leather chair opposite her and told him to sit. Leo sat down, placing his hands flat on the table. He didn't waste time. He pulled out the notarized Lien document and slid it across the polished mahogany. He told her he believed they had a problem with the Elm Street closing. The attorney snatched the paper before it even stopped sliding. He put on a pair of thin reading glasses, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced speed. Within 30 seconds, the man's posture shifted. He stopped slouching. He leaned forward, his pen tracing the notary seal, then looked up at Victoria, giving her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of his head. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she looked at Leo. She told him that Vanguard had run a standard title search 48 hours ago through the county electronic database, and the property showed up clear under the name of Arthur Vance, executor. She asked Leo how this document even existed without being flagged in the system. Leo explained it calmly. He told her that his grandmother's estate attorney had filed the physical, notarized Lien directly with the county clerk's office as a manual cloud on the title, purposely bypassing the standard electronic filing system to ensure it wouldn't be easily wiped or altered by a third party. He pointed out that under state property law, a physically recorded primary lien took absolute precedence over any subsequent estate transfers, regardless of what the digital portal showed. Victoria leaned back, tapping an expensive pen against her chin. She noted that Arthur had signed an affidavit under penalty of perjury stating there were no encumbrances, liens, or clouds on the title. She looked directly into Leo's eyes and asked if he realized his father had committed first-degree grand larceny and real estate fraud by signing that contract. Leo didn't blink. He told her he knew exactly what his father did. He stated that Arthur's legal problems were his own, but the property could not close and the deed could not transfer until the full amount of his primary lien was satisfied. Victoria smiled, a cold, predatory expression that showed she was used to getting exactly what she wanted. She told Leo that Vanguard had already wired a non-refundable $100,000 earnest money deposit to an escrow account, and they had contracted crews to begin demolition on the house Monday morning to clear the lot for a multi-family complex. She offered to write Leo a check for $10,000 right now to sign a waiver releasing the lien, warning him that if he refused, Vanguard's legal team would tie him up in litigation for the next 5 years until he was broke. Leo looked at the contract on the table, then looked back at Victoria. He told her that $10,000 didn't even cover the interest his father owed their grandmother. He explained that Vanguard's legal team could file whatever they wanted, but the law was clear. Without his signature on the deed release, any structure they built on that land would technically belong to the lien holder. He asked her how Vanguard's investors would feel about funding a multi-million-dollar project built on a stolen title. The attorney leaned over and whispered urgently into Victoria's ear. Her expression hardened further. She realized Leo wasn't a desperate kid looking for a quick payout. He was someone who understood the leverage he held. Before Victoria could respond, the heavy glass doors of the conference room burst open. Arthur stepped inside, panting heavily, his face flushed red, his expensive suit soaked with sweat at the armpits. He had clearly run from the subway station. He looked at Leo with pure fury, then turned to Victoria, his hands raised in a frantic gesture of apology. Arthur begged her not to listen to Leo, claiming his son was just bitter about the inheritance and was trying to extort the company. He insisted the document Leo brought was fake, a forged piece of paper his mother signed when she wasn't in her right mind. He pleaded with them to proceed with the closing, promising he would handle his son personally outside the office. Victoria didn't stand up. She didn't even look angry. She just looked disgusted. She told Arthur to shut up and sit down. Arthur froze, his mouth open, before slowly lowering himself into the chair next to Leo. He leaned in close, his voice a frantic whisper, telling Leo he was ruining everything, that the people he owed money to were going to break his legs if this deal fell through, and begged him to just let it go. Leo ignored him entirely, keeping his eyes fixed on Victoria. He told her he had a counter-proposal. He stated that he would not sign the release for the contract they currently had with Arthur. However, he was willing to negotiate a completely new sale directly with Vanguard, one that properly satisfied the primary Lien, bypassed Arthur entirely, and ensured the historic features of the home were preserved rather than demolished. Victoria looked intrigued. She asked what his terms were. Leo told her the price was the full appraisal value of the house plus the exact amount of the lien, paid directly to a secure trust account. Furthermore, he demanded a clause stating the exterior structure of the home could not be demolished, but rather integrated into their new development design. Arthur jumped out of his seat, screaming that Leo couldn't do this, that he was the executor and the money belonged to him. The corporate attorney finally spoke up, cutting Arthur off with a cold, sharp tone. He told Arthur that because he had misrepresented the title's status, Vanguard was officially declaring him in default of the contract. He warned Arthur that if he didn't sign the mutual rescission agreement right now, Vanguard would file criminal fraud charges with the state attorney general before the banks closed at 5 o'clock. Arthur looked like he had been struck by lightning. The bravado, the anger, the desperation, it all collapsed in an instant, leaving behind a broken, middle-aged man who realized his luck had finally run out completely. He looked at the attorney, then at Victoria, realizing neither of them cared about his excuses. They only cared about the land. Victoria slid a single sheet of paper toward Arthur, the rescission agreement. She told him he had 60 seconds to sign it and vacate the premises before security escorted him out in handcuffs. Arthur's hand shook violently as he took the pen. He looked at Leo, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and pathetic pleading, but Leo just watched him with a blank expression. Arthur pressed the pen to the paper and scribbled his signature, effectively throwing away his claim to the house and his escape route from his debts. Once signed, Victoria took the paper back, checking it over before nodding to the security guard standing at the door. She ordered the guard to escort Mr. Arthur Vance out of the building. Arthur stood up, his legs trembling. As he walked past Leo, he stopped, leaning down to hiss that Leo was dead to him, that he had ruined his own father's life, and that he would regret this day for the rest of his life. Leo didn't look up as his father was led out of the room, the heavy glass doors clicking shut behind him. The room became quiet again, save for the low hum of the air conditioning. Victoria turned her attention back to Leo, her laptop screen reflecting in her eyes. She told him that now that the garbage was cleared out of the way, they could discuss his terms. She admitted Vanguard wanted the lot badly, but warned him they wouldn't be extorted by a sentimental grandson. Leo leaned forward, his face deadpan. He told her it wasn't extortion, it was just regular business. He asked her if they were going to draft the new contract, or if he should take his title down the street to their primary competitor. Victoria didn't smile, but a sharp glint of appreciation sparked in her eyes. She liked people who didn't blink when the stakes got high. She told the corporate attorney to bring up the standard direct acquisition template with historical preservation riders, directing him to input the revised purchase price, adjusting for the primary Lien satisfaction. For the next 2 hours, the conference room transformed into a battlefield of red lines and legal clauses. The corporate attorney tried to chip away at Leo's terms, offering alternative payouts and trying to weaken the preservation clause down to a mere commemorative plaque on a new concrete wall. But Leo held his ground on every single point. He knew that Vanguard had already invested millions in acquiring the adjacent parcels of land. His grandmother's lot was the keystone that locked their entire commercial development together. Without it, their grand design was fractured. By 4:30 in the afternoon, the final contract was pulled up on the main screen. The terms were ironclad. The full equity value of the house, combined with the exact payoff of Evelyn's lien, would be wired directly to a protected trust account under Leo's sole name. More importantly, the exterior facade and the historic structural footprint of the craftsman home would remain intact, serving as the grand, preserved entrance to the new residential complex. Victoria turned the digital signing pad toward him. She told him that this was the absolute limit of Vanguard's flexibility, stating that if he didn't sign now, they would walk away, redesign the complex around his lot, and leave him with an island of wood surrounded by construction noise for the next 3 years. Leo read through the final paragraphs one last time. He saw his grandmother's name listed as the original grantor and his own name listed as the sole beneficiary of the cleared title. He took the stylus and signed his name with a firm, steady hand. Victoria took the pad back, verified the digital signatures, and closed her laptop with a sharp click. She stood up, extending her hand once more, this time with a genuine look of professional respect. She told him the wire transfer would hit his trust account by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, adding that the demolition crews had been reassigned to interior retrofitting only. She advised him that he had until Sunday night to remove any personal belongings he wanted to keep before the site was locked down. Leo shook her hand, thanked her for her time, and walked out of the fortress of steel and glass. When he stepped out onto the city street, the late afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. The heavy weight that had settled in his chest since his grandmother's passing finally began to lift. He felt exhausted, but the cold, survivalist focus that had driven him all day was replaced by a profound sense of peace. He drove back to Elm Street in the twilight. When he pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. The movers were long gone, their truck tracks still visible in the damp grass of the front lawn. The front porch was quiet, shadowed, and still. Arthur was gone, leaving behind nothing but a crumpled, empty pack of Camel lights on the top step. Leo unlocked the front door and walked into the absolute silence of the interior. Without the frantic energy of his father's greed echoing through the halls, the house felt like a sanctuary again. He walked through the rooms, looking at the faded wallpaper and the clean outlines where pictures used to hang. He didn't feel sadness anymore. He felt a quiet triumph. His father had tried to erase Evelyn's life for a quick payout, but the house was still standing, and its heart would remain part of the neighborhood forever. He spent the next 2 hours collecting the small things Arthur had missed or deemed worthless. An old recipe box filled with Evelyn's handwritten index cards, a box of faded family photographs from the 1970s, and the old brass key to the front door. As he was packing the last box into the back of his truck, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text message from an unknown number. It was a block of frantic, misspelled text from his father, sent from what looked like a burner phone or a borrowed line. Arthur wrote that Leo had ruined him, claiming the people he owed money to had already shown up at his apartment. He accused Leo of being selfish, stating that Evelyn would have hated what he did today, and warned him that he would never see a single dime of that money because he was going to contest the trust in court. Leo looked at the screen for a long moment. He didn't feel anger and he didn't feel pity. He typed out a simple, direct reply, telling Arthur that the trust was legally locked, the title fraud was documented, and if he ever contacted him again, the next communication would come directly from the state attorney general's office. He blocked the number immediately. Leo walked back up the porch steps one last time. He closed the heavy oak door, turned the deadbolt from the outside, and placed the brass key into his pocket. He looked up at the silhouette of the craftsman roof against the starlit sky. He had saved the house from his father's desperation, honored his grandmother's foresight, and secured his own future in the process. Arthur had thought he could steal a legacy in the dark, but Evelyn had left the light on for the one person she trusted to keep it safe. Leo climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove away into the night, leaving the past firmly behind him, exactly where it belonged.